The financial aid officer slid the paper toward me without meeting my eyes. "Second notice," she said quietly. "If it's not resolved, your classes will be dropped." I stepped into the hallway and called my dad. He didn't hesitate. "I told you already, Journey. Your brother needs it more. More than me. More than my future." When I went back inside, the same officer handed me a sealed envelope. "This came in for you," she said. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize Evelyn Carter's attorney. I opened it right there. My name sat at the top of a document I had never seen before: Irrevocable Educational Trust Beneficiary Journey Holmes. And at the bottom, a missing signature. "If you're watching from outside the U.S., tell me where you're from. What time is it there right now? And if you've ever been told something was for the family while it cost you everything, I'd really want to hear your story. Don't forget to subscribe." I didn't remember the walk back to my apartment. One moment I was standing in that hallway with a paper that said my future might be put on hold, and the next, I was unlocking my door, dropping my bag on the floor, and spreading the trust document across my small kitchen table like it might disappear if I blinked. Irrevocable Educational Trust. The words sounded heavier now, like they carried a meaning I hadn't been allowed to understand before. I read it once, then again, slower the second time. My grandmother Evelyn Carter had set it up years ago. The date was clear. It wasn't recent. It wasn't something done in secret after she passed. This had been planned, structured, signed, witnessed, and somehow never mentioned. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I trusted to make sense of legal language without turning it into a lecture. Alyssa picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you okay? You sound weird." "I just got something," I said. "From my grandma's lawyer. A trust, with my name on it." There was a pause. Papers rustled on her end. "Send it to me." I snapped photos and texted them over, then paced my apartment while she read. The silence stretched longer than I liked. Finally, she exhaled. "Journey, this is real." "What do you mean, real?" I asked, my voice tighter than I expected. "I mean, this isn't some placeholder or empty document. It's funded. It's structured for education expenses, tuition, housing-related costs. It's pretty standard, actually, but there's something here." I stopped pacing. "What?" "Clause 4.2, she said. Disbursement authorization." I flipped to the page, my eyes scanning the paragraph she was talking about. "Funds shall be released upon written confirmation by the designated trust administrator." My stomach dropped. "Which is currently listed as Marcus Holmes Alyssa Finished." "My dad," I said, even though she already knew. "Yeah." For a second, neither of us said anything. I sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. "So, I have money for tuition. It's right there. It exists. And I still got a second notice today." "Because the funds aren't automatically released," Alyssa said carefully. "They require confirmation from the administrator." "And he never did it," I whispered. "Looks like it." I scanned the rest of the document again, but now everything felt different. Every line that had seemed distant suddenly felt personal, controlled. "Wait," I said. "Wouldn't I have been notified, like emails, statements, something?" "You should have," she said. "Unless everything was routed through the administrator." I pulled up my inbox and searched my grandmother's name, then the law firm, then anything with the word trust. Nothing. No notifications, no updates, no warnings. Just silence. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. He knew, I said. It wasn't a question. Alyssa didn't answer right away. It's very likely he did. I picked up the document again, flipping to the final page. There it was. Administrator acknowledgement. A blank signature line. No date, no initials, no record of action. "How long has this been sitting like this?" I asked. "Since it was created," it looks like she said. "Journey. When did you start school?" 3 years ago. And this trust predates that. 3 years. 3 years of student loans, of budgeting every dollar, of skipping things I couldn't afford, of hearing my dad say over and over, "We'll help when we can." My grip tightened on the paper. I asked him last semester, I said slowly, when I was short on housing. He told me things were tight, that I needed to be patient. Alyssa's voice softened. I'm sorry. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. No, don't be. I need to understand. Because right now, nothing made sense. If the money existed, why was I the one struggling? My phone buzzed on the table. A text from my dad. Marcus Holmes. We'll talk about this later. Not over the phone. I stared at the message. Not, what is this? Not let me explain. Just control. I typed back before I could overthink it. Journey. There's nothing to talk about. I already have the document. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Marcus Holmes. You don't understand how these things work. I let out a quiet laugh that didn't feel like mine. Maybe I didn't, but I understood enough to know something wasn't right. I looked back down at the trust, at the empty line where his signature should have been, at the clause that stood between me and everything my grandmother had set aside for me. Alyssa. I said, my voice steadier now. If he never signs that, what happens? There was a pause. Then technically she said the funds just sit there, so I just keep struggling while it's right there. Not necessarily, she replied. There are ways to challenge an administrator who's not acting in the beneficiary's best interest. But that's a step. A step. It sounded small when she said it, but it didn't feel small. It felt like a line. I picked up the document one more time, smoothing out the edges like that might make everything clearer. My grandmother had planned for me, carefully, intentionally, and somehow that plan had been stopped, not delayed by circumstance. Stopped by a decision. I glanced at my phone again, at my dad's last message. You don't understand how these things work. Maybe he was right, but I was starting to understand something else. This wasn't about timing. It wasn't about money being tight. It wasn't even about helping my brother. It was about control. And for the first time, I realized that the signature missing from that document wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. The drive to my parents' house in Naperville felt longer than it used to. I hadn't been back in weeks. Not because I didn't have time, but because I was tired of leaving those dinners feeling smaller than when I arrived. Still, this time was different. This time I wasn't coming back to ask for anything. I parked outside the house I grew up in, staring at the familiar brick exterior, the trimmed hedges, the porch light my mom always left on. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I wasn't so sure. My mom, Denise Holmes, opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Journey, you made it, she said, pulling me into a quick hug. We were just about to sit down. That meant my dad was already home. And Tyler, too. Perfect. I stepped inside, the smell of roasted chicken and something buttery filling the air. Tyler's voice echoed from the dining room, laughing at something on his phone. Normal? Everything felt normal. Too normal. I slipped my bag off my shoulder and followed my mom into the dining room. My dad, Marcus Holmes, was already seated at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone like he always did before dinner. Tyler sat across from me, a hoodie half-zipped, looking relaxed in a way I didn't recognize in myself anymore. Hey, Tyler said, barely glancing up. Did you get your tuition thing figured out? I held his gaze for a second. Working on it. My dad didn't look up. You'll manage, he said, like it was already settled. I pulled out my chair and sat down slowly. Actually, I said, keeping my voice even, that's what I wanted to talk about. My mom placed a dish in the center of the table, her movements suddenly more careful. Let's eat first, she said lightly. No, I said. I think we should talk now. That got my dad's attention. He set his phone down, finally looking at me. Journey. I got something from Grandma's lawyer, I said, cutting in before I lost the nerve. A trust. In my name. The silence that followed was immediate. Heavy. Tyler frowned. What trust? My mom's hand stilled on the serving spoon. And my dad? My dad leaned back in his chair like he'd been expecting this moment, just not tonight. You misunderstood something, he said calmly. I almost laughed. I didn't misunderstand anything I replied. It's an educational trust. It covers tuition, housing, everything. It's been active since I started school. Tyler looked between us. Wait, seriously? I turned to him. Yeah. Seriously? He blinked, then looked at my dad. So, why isn't she using it? Good question. I shifted my attention back to my dad. That's exactly what I'd like to know. He folded his hands on the table, the picture of control. These things aren't as simple as they look on paper, he said. There are conditions, timing, strategy. Strategy, I repeated. It says the funds are released when you confirm it. That's it. That's not the full picture, he said. Then explain it, I said. For a second, I thought he might. But instead, he reached for his glass and took a slow sip of water. Journey, you've always been capable, he said. Independent. I didn't want you relying on something too early. I stared at him. You didn't want me accessing money that was set aside for me, I asked. It's not about the money, he said. Then what is it about? Before he could answer, Tyler spoke up again. Dad literally just paid my housing deposit last week, he said casually. And the new laptop. And Tyler, my mom cut in sharply. But it was too late. I felt something inside me go still. Your housing deposit? I asked quietly. Tyler shrugged, suddenly less confident. Yeah. I mean, college is expensive. I nodded slowly, my eyes drifting to the stack of papers near the end of the table. I hadn't noticed them before. Now I leaned forward just enough to read the top page. Tuition statement paid in full. Tyler Holmes. My chest tightened. You paid his tuition, I said, not looking away from the paper. My dad didn't answer. You told me things were tight, I continued. You told me to be patient, that we'd figure it out. Journey. And all this time, I said, finally meeting his eyes, you had access to a trust that could have covered everything. It wasn't the right time, he said again, his voice firmer now. For who, I asked. For you, he replied. The answer landed like a slap. My mom shifted uncomfortably. We just didn't want you to feel dependent, she said softly. I let out a breath that felt like it had been building for years. I've been taking out loans, I said. Working extra hours, skipping things I couldn't afford, and you were worried about me feeling dependent? No one spoke. Tyler looked down at his plate. My dad's jaw tightened. You're making this bigger than it is. I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made a decision about my future without ever telling me. I did what I thought was best for the family, he said. There it was. The phrase I'd heard my whole life. For the family. I pushed my chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor. Then explain this, I said, pulling the folded copy of the trust document from my bag and sliding it across the table toward him. He didn't touch it. Clause 4.2, I continued. You're the one who authorizes the release, but you never signed. Not once. My mom glanced at the paper, then at him. Tyler leaned in curious now. My dad stayed still. It's more complicated than that, he said. No, I said quietly. It's not. Because for the first time, it wasn't. It was simple. He had the power to help me. And he chose not to. I'm going to talk to Grandma's lawyer. I added, my voice steadier than I felt, directly. That got a reaction. My dad's eyes sharpened. That's not necessary. I think it is. You don't understand how these things work, he said, his tone shifting less calm, now more warning. I stood up. Then I'll learn, I said. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Less like avoidance, more like something had been exposed. As I picked up my bag, my mom finally spoke. Journey? Just give your dad time, she said gently. He's trying to do what's right. I paused at the doorway, turning back just enough to look at them. At some point I said, what's right should include me. No one had an answer for that. I stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting my face as the door closed behind me. For a moment I just stood there, breathing, thinking, replaying everything. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the email from the law firm again. There was a contact name at the bottom, Daniel Kaplan. I hovered over the number. If my dad had been telling the truth, the lawyer would confirm it. And if he hadn't? I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then someone picked up. Kaplan and Associates, a voice said. How can I help you? I tightened my grip on the phone. My name is Journey Holmes, I said. I think. I need to understand a trust that was never explained to me. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, I've been expecting your call. I've been expecting your call. I stood there on the sidewalk phone, pressed to my ear, not sure how to respond to that. Excuse me, I said. The voice on the other end remained calm. This is Daniel Kaplan. Your grandmother asked me to make sure you were informed. Eventually. Eventually. That word stayed with me longer than anything else he said. I have the trust documents, I replied, but I don't understand why I'm just finding out now. There was a pause, like he was choosing his words carefully. Would you be able to come into the office tomorrow morning? Yes, I said immediately. Good. Bring everything you have. We'll go through it together. The call ended, and for the first time that night, I felt something steady underneath the confusion. Not relief. Clarity was coming. Kaplan's office was on the 12th floor of a building that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a law firm. Glass, steel, quiet hallways, everything in its place. Nothing about it felt emotional, which made it easier to walk in. His assistant greeted me, then led me into a conference room where a man in his late 50s stood as I entered. Journey Holmes, he said, offering his hand. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I shook it. You said you were expecting my call. He gave a small nod. Your grandmother anticipated resistance. That word landed differently now. Resistance, from who I didn't have to ask. We sat down across from each other, and I laid out the documents I had brought, smoothing them on the table the same way I had the night before. Kaplan glanced at them, then reached for a file already waiting in front of him. I'm going to walk you through this in plain terms, he said. No legal jargon unless you ask for it. Please, I said. I just want to understand what's been happening. He opened the file. Your grandmother established this trust 5 years ago, he began. Her intent was very clear. Your education would be fully funded. Tuition, housing, reasonable living expenses. She didn't want you to be financially dependent on anyone else in the family. I swallowed. That part didn't surprise me. That sounded exactly like her. What she did, he continued, was designate your father as the initial trust administrator. That means he was responsible for authorizing distributions based on the trust's terms. I know that part, I said. What I don't understand is why nothing was ever released. Kaplan slid a document toward me. This is the activation clause, he said. It states that once you enrolled in an accredited university, the trust became eligible for disbursement. I read the line again, even though I had already memorized it. Eligible, not conditional, not delayed. Eligible. That happened 3 years ago, I said. Yes, he replied. And since then, Kaplan tapped the next page. There have been no authorized distributions from the trust. The room felt smaller. No attempts I asked. No requests. No approvals. No activity initiated by the administrator. My chest tightened. So he just did nothing. From a legal standpoint, Kaplan said carefully he failed to act. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process that. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a timing issue. It was absence. Intentional or not, it didn't matter. The result was the same. I asked him, I said quietly, multiple times, about money, about help. He told me things were tight. Kaplan didn't interrupt. He told me to be patient, I added. That we'd figure it out. And meanwhile, Kaplan said the trust remained untouched. I looked down at the file again. Is that illegal? I asked. He didn't rush the answer. It can be, he said. Trust administrators have what's called a fiduciary duty. That means they are legally required to act in the best interest of the beneficiary, in this case you. I nodded slowly. So if he didn't act in my best interest, then it could be considered a breach of that duty. The words settled heavily. Not dramatic, not explosive, just precise. And what happens if that's proven? I asked. There are remedies, Kaplan said. A court can compel distribution. It can remove the administrator. In some cases, it can require restitution if harm was caused. Harm. I thought about the loans, the stress, the decisions I had made because I believed I didn't have options. That sounds like a lot, I said. It is, he agreed, which is why we don't jump there immediately. First, we establish facts. He turned another page. This is where things become more specific. He slid a printed email across the table. I recognized my father's name immediately. Marcus Holmes. The email was addressed to a financial advisor. Subject trust timing. I read it once. Then again, let's hold off on activating Journey's distributions for now, it said. She needs to learn how to manage things independently. My throat went dry. There are several emails like this, Kaplan said. All within the first year of your enrollment. So he decided, I said slowly, on his own. That appears to be the case. I looked up. Is that allowed? Not under the terms your grandmother established, he replied. The trust doesn't include a discretionary delay clause. His role was administrative, not interpretive, meaning he wasn't supposed to decide. He was supposed to follow instructions. I stared at the email again, something inside me shifting. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't even about control in the abstract. It was a choice, a documented one. Is there more, I asked. Kaplan hesitated for the first time. Yes, he said. But I want to be careful about how we approach it. Just show me, I said. He reached into the file and pulled out another document. Internal correspondence, he explained. Between your father and the advisor. The title at the top read, Internal Allocation Notes. My fingers tightened slightly as I took it. Before you read it, Kaplan added, I want you to understand. This may clarify intent, but it can also be difficult to see in writing. I nodded. I'd rather know. He didn't argue. I lowered my eyes to the page. The first few lines were numbers, percentages, budget allocations. Then I saw it, a sentence that didn't belong among the calculations. Tyler will need more upfront support. Journey can manage without immediate access. Use trust as leverage if necessary. Leverage. I felt the word before I fully understood it. My chest tightened not sharply but steadily, like something settling into place that I couldn't undo. He wrote this. I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Yes, Kaplan said. I looked back at the page. Leverage. Not safety. Not support. A tool. I set the document down carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Kaplan leaned forward slightly. Journey, he said. Based on what we have, there's a clear pattern of delayed action. The question now is how you want to proceed. I nodded, but my mind wasn't fully in the room anymore. It was back at that dinner table, at every conversation where I had been told to wait, to be patient, to understand. And now I did, just not in the way they expected. I looked up at Kaplan. What are my options, I asked. He met my gaze. We can start with a formal demand for distribution. That gives your father an opportunity to comply without escalating further. And if he doesn't, then we consider stronger action. I let that sit for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. A new message had come in from my mom. Denise Holmes. Your dad says you went to a lawyer. Please don't do anything you can't take back. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the documents in front of me. At the email. At the word leverage. Some things had already been done. Already written. Already chosen. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. I think I said slowly he already made that decision. Kaplan didn't respond right away. He simply nodded once. And for the first time since I opened that envelope, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was deciding. Kaplan didn't push me to speak right away. He gave me space, the kind that wasn't empty, but intentional. Like he understood that once something shifts in your mind, you can't rush what comes next. I looked back down at the document spread across the table, the trust, the activation clause, the emails, and that one sentence I couldn't stop hearing in my head. Use trust as leverage if necessary. I want to see everything, I said finally, not just parts of it. Kaplan studied me for a second, then nodded. That's fair. He turned the file toward me and began organizing the pages in a way that felt less like evidence and more like a timeline. "Let's walk through this step by step," he said, "so you can see how decisions were made over time." I leaned forward. He pointed to the earliest document. "This is the trust creation 5 years ago. Very clear intent. Your grandmother structured it specifically to prevent dependency on family-controlled funds." I nodded. That part at least still felt steady. "She trusted the system," I said. "She trusted structure," he corrected gently. "Structure can outlast people's choices." I let that sit. He moved to the next section. "These are the first communications after your enrollment. Emails between your father and the financial advisor." I had already seen one of them, but there were more. Different dates, different phrasing, same direction. "Delay. Wait. Reassess next semester. She's managing fine for now." Each line chipped away at something I hadn't realized I was holding on to. Not hope. Something quieter. The belief that maybe this had been accidental. Was there ever a point, I asked, where he considered just following the trust? Kaplan paused, then pulled out a page I hadn't seen yet. "This one," he said. I took it from him. It was an email draft unsent. "Subject disbursement authorization." My dad's name was at the bottom. The body was short, requesting initial release for Journey's tuition and housing per trust terms. That was it. No conditions, no hesitation, just a straightforward request. My chest tightened. "When was this?" I asked. 3 weeks after your first tuition bill," Kaplan said. I closed my eyes briefly. 3 weeks. He had almost done it. "He didn't send it," I said. "No." "Why?" Kaplan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid another document across the table. "Because of this." I looked down. Another email. Same week. From the financial advisor. "Marcus, before proceeding, you may want to consider long-term allocation across both children. Tyler's projected needs appear higher in early years." I stopped reading. "Of course." "Balance," I said quietly. Kaplan nodded. "That appears to have been the framing." I let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have. "So instead of following the trust, I said he decided to redistribute his attention." "Not the trust funds themselves," Kaplan clarified. "Those remained untouched. But yes, his financial support outside the trust seems to have shifted toward your brother." I thought about Tyler's tuition statement, the laptop, the housing deposit. It wasn't hidden. It was just never explained. "Can I ask something?" I said. "Of course." If the trust had been used as intended, would there have been less pressure on him to pay for Tyler? Kaplan considered that. "In practical terms, yes. The trust would have covered your expenses, which may have allowed him to allocate his personal resources differently." "So he didn't need to choose," I said slowly. "No," Kaplan replied. "He chose to create that choice." That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't about scarcity anymore. It was about control of outcomes. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before looking back down. "Okay," I said. "What about the present? What's happening right now?" Kaplan flipped to the most recent section of the file. "There's been no change in activity," he said. "No attempt to correct the delay, no retroactive disbursement request. Even after I contacted you. Even after!" That surprised me more than I expected. Not because I thought he'd suddenly fix things, but because I thought he'd at least try to contain it. "He texted my mom," I said. "She told me not to do anything I can't take back." Kaplan's expression didn't change. "That's a common response when legal structure enters a family dynamic." I almost smiled at that. Common. There was something strangely comforting about knowing this wasn't entirely unique. That other people had sat in rooms like this, holding documents like these, trying to make sense of choices made by people they trusted. "So what do we do?" I asked. Kaplan folded his hands. "We start with a formal demand for distribution. It's a written notice requiring the administrator to fulfill their duty under the trust. And if he ignores it, then we escalate. But most administrators respond at that stage." I nodded. "And what does that look like for me?" I asked. "Timing, I mean. If he complies promptly, Kaplan said funds could be released within a few weeks. Possibly sooner." "A few weeks." After 3 years. I let out a slow breath. That's manageable, I said. It is, he agreed. But there's one more thing you should consider. I looked at him. Once we send this letter, he said, it changes the dynamic. This is no longer a private family disagreement. It becomes a formal legal matter. I think it already is, I said. Legally, yes, he replied. But emotionally, that shift can be more difficult than people expect. I thought about my mom's message, about my dad's silence, about Tyler sitting at that table not really understanding what any of this meant. I'm not trying to destroy anything I said. I just don't want to be controlled by something I didn't even know existed. Kaplan nodded. That's a reasonable position. I looked down at the documents one more time. At the unsent email, at the advisor's suggestion, at the notes that turned my education into a variable. It wasn't one decision. It was a series of them, layered, justified, repeated. I reached for the pen Kaplan had placed near the edge of the table. What do you need from me? I asked. A signature, he said, authorizing us to act on your behalf. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I understood what it meant. This wasn't just about tuition anymore. It was about stepping out of something I had been inside my entire life. I signed. Kaplan took the document, reviewed it briefly, then set it aside. I'll have the demand letter drafted today, he said. Your father will receive it within 24 hours. I nodded. Journey, he added, once this is sent, he may try to reach out. To negotiate. To explain. I know, I said. Just remember, he continued, you don't have to respond immediately, or at all. Let the process work. I stood up, gathering my things. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt aligned. Not calm, but clear. As I walked out of the office, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Marcus Holmes. We need to talk. Now. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I locked it and slipped it into my bag. He was right. We did need to talk. Just not on his terms anymore. I didn't answer my dad's message that day. Or the next. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because for the first time I didn't feel like I owed him immediate access to me. Kaplan's words stayed in my head. Let the process work. So I did. The demand letter went out the following morning. I didn't read the full legal language, just the summary Kaplan sent me. Clear, direct, no emotion. Request for immediate compliance with the terms of the trust. Failure to act constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. Response required within a specified time frame. It felt strange seeing my life reduced to a few paragraphs, but it also felt solid, like something that couldn't be talked around. 3 days later, my dad called. Not a text, not a message through my mom. A direct call. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Hello, what are you doing? He asked. No greeting, no build-up. I leaned back against my couch. Hi, Dad. Don't do that, he said sharply. Don't pretend this is normal. I'm not pretending anything, I replied. You involved a lawyer, he continued, without talking to me first. I let out a slow breath. I tried talking to you. That was different, he said. How? Silence. Then you escalated this. No, I said quietly. You delayed it. Another pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was deciding which version of himself to be. The calm one, or the one I'd seen at the dinner table. You don't understand the bigger picture, he said finally. I almost smiled. That's what you keep saying, I replied. So explain it to me. He didn't. Instead, he shifted. You're putting unnecessary pressure on the family, he said. Your mom is upset. Tyler doesn't know what's going on. That's not my responsibility, I said. It is when you're part of this family. I sat up straighter. That's exactly the problem, I said. Everything gets framed as the family, except when it comes to me. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you made decisions about my future without telling me, and now I'm supposed to protect everyone else's comfort. That's not what I did, he said, his tone tightening. Then what did you do? I pressed. He exhaled sharply. I made a judgment call. About money that wasn't yours. It was under my administration, not your control, I said. There's a difference. That seemed to hit something. You think this is about control? He asked. I know it is, I said. I've seen the emails. The line went quiet, long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. You went through my emails. I reviewed documents related to a trust I'm legally tied to. I corrected. There's a difference. Another silence. Then, you weren't supposed to see those. There it was. Not denial, not clarification, just acknowledgement. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I saw the part where you said to hold off, I said. That I'd figure it out on my own. He didn't respond. And I saw the part where the trust was described as leverage, I added. That word hung between us. Heavy, uncomfortable. You're taking that out of context, he said quickly. Then give me the context, I replied. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, something shifted again. Because for once, he didn't have a clean explanation ready. It was about timing, he said eventually. About making sure you developed the right habits. Discipline, independence. You think struggling was the only way to do that, I asked. I think it was effective, he said. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I needed a moment to absorb how clearly he believed that. And Tyler, I asked. What was that about? That's different. How? He needed more support early on. So you gave it to him? Yes. And you withheld mine, I said. I delayed yours. 3 years, I said. That's not a delay. That's a decision. He didn't argue with that. Instead, he changed direction again. Look, he said, his voice softening slightly. We can fix this without turning it into something bigger. I didn't like where that was going. How I asked. I can transfer the money directly, he said. Out of my own accounts. Cover your tuition, your housing, whatever you need. I sat very still. Outside the trust, I asked. Yes. Why? Because it's faster, he said. Cleaner. No legal complications. I let out a quiet breath. There's already legal structure, I said. That's the point. This doesn't have to be adversarial journey. It already is, I replied. It doesn't have to stay that way. I thought about that. About how easy it would be to say yes. To take the money. To avoid everything that came after. No court. No paperwork. No tension. Just resolution. But something about it felt off. Not wrong. Strategic. For him. If I accept that, I said slowly, what happens to the trust? It stays where it is, he replied. We can deal with it later. Later. Another delay. Another open loop. No, I said. He went quiet. No, he repeated. I'm not interested in a workaround, I said. I'm interested in what was already set up for me being followed. You're being rigid. I'm being clear. You're choosing process over relationship. I let that sit for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I'm choosing structure over uncertainty, I said. Because structure is the only thing that hasn't changed depending on how you feel. That hit harder than I expected. I could hear it in the silence that followed. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Maybe I replied. But it's mine to make. Another pause. Longer this time. Then his voice shifted again, quieter, less certain. If you go through with this, he said, things aren't going to be the same. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I know. And you're okay with that. I looked around my apartment, at the table where I had spread out the documents, at the space I had built on my own, at the version of myself that existed before I knew any of this, and the one that was starting to take shape now. I think I said slowly, things haven't been the same for a long time. He didn't respond. And for the first time in the conversation, neither did I. I let the silence stay, not as a tactic, just as truth. Eventually, he spoke again. We'll talk soon, he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I'll be in touch through my lawyer, I said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and sat there for a moment. Not shaking, not overwhelmed. Just steady. Because something had changed. Not in him. In me. I wasn't asking anymore. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't negotiating for access to something that already had my name on it. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. For the first time since all of this started, the next step didn't feel unclear. It felt inevitable. The apartment was quiet after that call. Too quiet. Not the kind of silence that felt peaceful. The kind that made everything echo a little louder than it should. I set my phone on the counter and stood there for a minute, staring at nothing in particular, letting the conversation settle into something I could actually hold on to. He hadn't denied it. Not really. He had reframed it, justified it, redirected it, but he hadn't denied it. I exhaled slowly, then reached for my laptop. If I was going to keep moving forward, I needed to understand everything, not just what had happened, but how it had been decided. I opened the folder Kaplan had shared with me. Every document, every email, every note, all of it was there, structured, dated, organized in a way that made it impossible to ignore the pattern. I clicked on the file that had been sitting in the back of my mind since yesterday. Internal allocation notes. I had skimmed it before. This time I read it carefully, line by line. It wasn't just one sentence. It was a framework. Projected expenses for both children, timelines, risk assessments. And then in the margins, actual typed notes. Tyler's academic transition likely requires early financial stability. Journey demonstrates higher adaptability under constraint. I paused. Adaptability under constraint. I read it again. It sounded clinical, neutral, like an observation. But it wasn't neutral. It was a justification. A reason to treat two people differently under the same structure. I scrolled further. Recommend delaying Journey's access to encourage independent financial management behaviors. Encourage. That word sat there like it softened everything that came after, like it made the decision sound intentional in a way that felt constructive. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just about money. It was about how I had been evaluated, measured, categorized, and then assigned an outcome based on that. I closed the document and sat there for a second staring at the screen. Then I opened my messages. Alyssa had texted earlier. Alyssa, did he reach out? I typed back. Journey. Yeah. Offered to pay me directly if I dropped the legal process. The response came almost immediately. Alyssa, that's not surprising. Journey. It felt convenient. Alyssa, it is. It keeps control in his hands. I stared at that for a second. Keeps control in his hands. I thought about the trust, about how it had been structured specifically to avoid that, and how somehow it had still ended up there. Journey. If I had said yes, what would that mean legally? Alyssa. It wouldn't invalidate the trust, but it would weaken your position if things escalated later. It also creates ambiguity. Was the trust necessary, or were you satisfied with informal support? Ambiguity, another word that worked in his favor. I typed slowly. Journey. So staying within the trust structure matters. Alyssa, a lot. It keeps everything documented, enforceable, and clear. Clear. That was what I wanted. Not just resolution. Clarity. I set the phone down and opened another file. This one was labeled Administrator Correspondence. Most of it I had already seen, but there was one document I hadn't opened yet. It was dated about a year ago. No subject line, just a note. I clicked it. It was shorter than I expected. Reviewed Journey status. Continuing current approach. No immediate action required. No immediate action required. I let out a quiet breath. A year ago, after everything, after the loans, the conversations, the times I had asked for help and been told to wait, he had reviewed my situation and decided to do nothing. Not because he forgot, not because he didn't know, because he chose not to act. I closed the laptop slowly. That was the moment it shifted again. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just clearly. There was no version of this where I misunderstood. No missing context that would make it feel different. It was consistent. Intentional. Sustained. I reached for my phone again and called Kaplan. He picked up on the second ring. Journey, he said. I was actually about to reach out to you. About what I asked. We received a response, he said. My chest tightened slightly. From my dad. Yes. I sat down. What did he say? He acknowledged receipt of the demand letter, Kaplan said, and indicated he's considering his options. I let out a small, almost humorless laugh. Of course he is. There's more, Kaplan added. I waited. He also mentioned the possibility of resolving this without formal enforcement. By offering to pay me directly, I said. There was a brief pause. You're aware of that? He called me, I said. I see. He wants to keep it informal, I added. Yes, Kaplan said. Which is not unusual in situations like this, because it avoids creating a record, I said. Among other things, he replied. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I'm not interested in that, I said. I had a feeling, he said. There was a slight shift in his tone, subtle but noticeable. Journey. He continued, based on his response. We may be approaching a point where more formal action is necessary. What does that mean, I asked. It means, if he doesn't comply voluntarily, we can petition to have him removed as the trust administrator. Removed. The word landed differently than I expected. Not heavy, not dramatic, just final. And then what I asked. A successor administrator would be appointed, Kaplan said. At that point, the trust could be executed without his involvement. I sat with that. A version of this where my dad wasn't the one in control, where the structure actually worked the way it was designed to. Would that happen quickly, I asked. It depends, Kaplan said. But given the documentation we have, the case is strong. I looked around my apartment again, at everything I had built on my own, at everything I had navigated without knowing this existed. I don't want to drag this out, I said. I understand. But I also don't want to compromise the structure just to make it easier for him. That's a reasonable position, Kaplan said. There was a brief silence. Then he added, There's one more thing you should be aware of. What? He requested a meeting. With you, I asked. With both of us, Kaplan said. And you? I sat up slightly. When? He didn't specify, Kaplan replied. Just that he believes a conversation could resolve misunderstandings. I almost smiled at that. Misunderstandings. That word again. He wants to talk, I said. Yes. I thought about the last conversation we had, about how carefully he had tried to guide it, control it, reframe it, and how this time it would be different. Do I have to agree to that, I asked. No, Kaplan said. Not at all. It's entirely your choice. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. A meeting wouldn't change the documents. It wouldn't change the emails. It wouldn't change the decisions that had already been made. But it might reveal something else, something he hadn't put in writing. I'll do it, I said finally. Kaplan didn't react immediately. Are you sure? Yes, I said, but on one condition. Which is, it happens in your office. With everything on the table. There was a brief pause. Then, that can be arranged. I nodded. Set it up, I said. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment letting the decision settle. This wasn't about convincing him anymore. It wasn't about understanding his reasoning. I already had that. This was about something else. Clarity, closure, and maybe finally hearing him say it out loud. I reached for my laptop again, reopening the file with the internal allocation notes. My eyes went straight to the sentence that had started to define everything. Use trust as leverage if necessary. I read it once more. Then I closed the file, because the next time we talked, I wasn't going to ask him what he meant. I was going to ask him why. Kaplan scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at 10 a.m. He didn't ask me twice if I was sure. He just confirmed the time, sent the calendar invite, and attached a short note. We'll keep it structured. That word again. Structured. I held on to it more than I expected. The morning of the meeting, I got there early. Not because I was nervous, because I didn't want to walk in at the same time as my dad. I wanted a moment to settle into the room before everything started. Kaplan's assistant showed me into the same conference room as before. The documents were already laid out neatly on the table. Copies of the trust, the email chain, the internal notes. Nothing hidden, nothing softened, just facts. I took a seat on one side of the table and placed my bag beside me. For a few minutes it was quiet. Then the door opened. My dad walked in first. Marcus Holmes. He looked exactly the same as he always did, pressed shirt-controlled posture, the kind of presence that usually filled a room without effort. But today, something was different. Not in how he looked, in how he paused. Just for a second. When he saw me sitting there, Kaplan followed him in closing the door behind them. "Thank you both for coming," Kaplan said evenly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "No small talk. No easing into it. Just beginning." My dad sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded once. "Journey." "Dad?" Kaplan folded his hands. "I understand there's been some communication already. The goal today is to clarify positions and, if possible, reach a resolution consistent with the trust's terms." My dad leaned back slightly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding of intent," he said. Kaplan didn't respond. He just gestured lightly toward the documents. "Then let's start with the written record," he said. I watched my dad's eyes flicker briefly toward the papers. He recognized them. Of course he did. These emails, Kaplan continued, indicate a pattern of delayed authorization despite eligibility under the trust. My dad's jaw tightened slightly. "Context matters," agreed, Kaplan said. "That's why we're here." There was a pause. Then my dad looked at me. "Journey, I never intended for you to struggle," he said. I held his gaze. "I don't think intent is the question anymore," I replied. "Outcome is." He didn't like that. I could see it in the way his posture shifted just slightly, but enough. "You were doing well," he said. "You were managing." I didn't want to interfere with that. By withholding access to something designed to support me, I asked. "It wasn't withholding," he said. "It was pacing." Kaplan spoke before I could respond. "The trust does not include discretionary pacing," he said calmly. "It outlines a clear condition for disbursement, which was met." My dad turned toward him. "And it also names me as administrator." "With administrative authority," Kaplan corrected. "Not interpretive control." Another pause. This one heavier. My dad looked back at me again, his expression shifting into something more personal. "I thought I was helping you," he said. I didn't answer right away, because part of me believed that. Not completely, but enough to understand where it came from. "That's the problem," I said finally. "You thought you got to decide what help looked like." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Kaplan slid a document forward. "Let's address this directly," he said. "The internal allocation notes." My dad's eyes dropped to the page. I watched him read the line I already knew by heart. "Use trust as leverage if necessary." He didn't react immediately, but I saw it. That small shift. "That recognition. That's being taken out of context," he said, again, quieter this time. "Then give us the context," Kaplan said. The room went still. My dad looked at me, then at the document, then back at me. "It wasn't about control," he said slowly. "It was about balance." "Between who?" I asked. "Between both of you," he replied. "Tyler needed more support early on." "You didn't. So you decided to hold mine back," I said. "I decided to delay access," he corrected. "For 3 years." He didn't answer. Instead, he shifted again. "This didn't have to become legal," he said. "I offered to resolve it." "Outside the trust," I said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's simpler," he said. "Faster. It avoids all of this." He gestured lightly around the room. "The documents, the tension, the structure. All of this," he repeated. I shook my head. "This is the only reason we're even having a clear conversation," I said. He frowned slightly. "We could have had this conversation without lawyers." "We tried," I said. "You just didn't tell me the truth." That landed. Not dramatically, but enough. Kaplan let the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "at this point the question is straightforward. Are you willing to authorize the disbursement in accordance with the trust's terms?" My dad didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, looking at the ceiling for a second before returning his gaze to the table. Then to me. "If I do this," he said, "we're setting a precedent for what I asked, for how decisions are made in this family." I almost smiled. "That's already been said," I said. "I'm just not following it anymore." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he exhaled. Not sharply, not dramatically, just a release. I thought you'd understand eventually, he said. I do understand, I replied. He looked at me looked this time, and for a second I saw something different. Not control, not certainty, something closer to recognition. You were never supposed to find out this way, he said quietly. I nodded. That's exactly the problem. Kaplan shifted slightly in his seat. We can continue discussing intent, he said, or we can move toward resolution. My dad straightened. Then finally, he reached for the pen sitting near the edge of the table. No speech. No explanation. Just action. He pulled the trust document closer, flipped to the authorization page, and signed. Marcus Holmes. The sound of the pen on paper was quieter than I expected. But it changed everything. He set the pen down and slid the document back across the table. Kaplan reviewed it briefly, then nodded once. I'll process this immediately, he said. No one spoke after that. Not right away, because there wasn't much left to say. The structure had done what it was supposed to do. It held, even when everything around it didn't. My dad stood up first. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, something outside the documents, but he didn't. Take care of yourself, he said instead. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I sat there for a moment staring at the signature. 3 years. 1 decision. 1 line of ink. Kaplan gathered the documents carefully. You handled that well, he said. I nodded, but I didn't feel anything yet. Not relief. Not victory. Just stillness. Because the conversation we had in that room wasn't the end. It was just the first time everything had been said out loud. And now, there was nothing left to hide behind. The funds hit my student account 12 days later. I didn't celebrate when the email came through. I just opened it, read the numbers once, then again, making sure I hadn't misunderstood anything. Balance paid in full. Housing covered. Outstanding fees cleared. It was all there. Exactly as the trust had outlined. Exactly as it should have been 3 years ago. No extra message. No apology attached. Just completion. I closed my laptop and sat there for a minute, letting it sink in. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like something had been returned to its original place. The next step was quieter. I went to the university office in person this time. The same counter, the same hallway, the same woman behind the desk. She recognized me immediately. Hi, she said, a small smile forming. I saw your account update. Yeah, I replied. It's been resolved. She nodded. You're fully reinstated. Your classes are secure. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, I said. She tilted her head slightly. For what? For not making me feel like I was already out, I said. Her smile softened. You weren't. You just needed time. Time. That word again. I nodded, then turned and walked out. But this time, the hallway didn't feel like something I was passing through. It felt like something I had stayed in long enough to understand. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside. A message from Tyler. Tyler, hey. Can we talk? I stared at it for a second. He hadn't texted me since that dinner. Not during the calls. Not after the meeting. Not even after everything went legal. Just silence. Until now. I typed back. Journey about what? The response came slower this time. Tyler, I didn't know. About the trust. I believed him. Not because it made things easier, but because it made sense. He had been part of the outcome, not the decision. Journey, I know. Another pause. Then, Tyler, Dad's been weird since the meeting. I almost smiled at that. Weird felt like a small word for something that had shifted that much. Journey? Yeah. Tyler. He said you forced his hand. There it was. I leaned against the side of the building, looking out at the street. Cars moving. People walking. Everything continuing like nothing had happened. Journey. I didn't force anything. I just didn't let him delay it anymore. The typing dots appeared. Disappeared. Came back. Tyler, I didn't realize he wasn't helping you. I thought about that. About how visible his support had been. And how invisible mine had been. Journey. That's kind of the point. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, Tyler, I feel like I was part of it. I didn't answer right away, because this part wasn't about legal structure. It was about something harder to define. You didn't know was true, but it didn't erase the imbalance. Still, I chose my words carefully. Journey, you benefited from it. That's not the same as choosing it. He didn't respond immediately, but when he did, it was shorter. Tyler still. I could hear everything behind that one word. Guilt, confusion, maybe even a little bit of clarity. I looked down at my phone, then typed slowly. Journey, what matters is what you do now. The typing dots appeared again, then stopped, then disappeared completely. No reply. I didn't follow up. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to manage how other people felt about what happened. I was just letting it be. That night, I moved a few things into a new apartment. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The old place had been mine during everything, the uncertainty, the waiting, the figuring things out. But this one felt different. Not bigger, not better, just chosen. I set a box down in the living room and looked around. There wasn't much yet. A couch, a table, a few books stacked near the wall. But it felt like enough. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. Denise Holmes. Your father said everything's been resolved. I read the message twice. No question. No acknowledgement. Just a statement. Journey it has. A few seconds passed. Then, Denise Holmes. He's having a hard time with it. I leaned back against the wall. I wasn't surprised, but I also wasn't sure what she expected me to do with that. Journey, I think we all are. Another pause. Then, Denise Holmes. He thought he was protecting you. There it was again. That version of the story. The one where intention softened impact. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them and typed. Journey. That doesn't change what happened. The response didn't come right away. When it did, it was quieter. Denise Holmes, I know. That was new. Not agreement, but acknowledgement. I set my phone down and looked around the apartment again. At the space I had chosen. At the life I was stepping into without waiting for permission. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't fully let in yet. Not anger, not even relief. Just space. The kind that comes when something stops holding you in place. A week later, Kaplan sent me the final confirmation. Trust fully executed. Administrator actions completed. No further intervention required. I read it once, then saved the file. Not because I needed to revisit it, but because it marked something. An ending. Or maybe just a shift. Because even though everything had been resolved on paper, there was still one thing left that hadn't. Not legally. Personally. And I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do about that. The last thing I did wasn't legal. It wasn't required. And no one would have blamed me if I skipped it. But it felt unfinished without it. I asked my dad to meet. Not in Kaplan's office. Not at the house in Naperville. Somewhere neutral. A quiet cafe halfway between where we both lived. He agreed. That alone told me things had changed. He was already there when I walked in, sitting near the window, a cup of coffee in front of him untouched. For a moment, I just stood there taking in the image. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. Like something that used to anchor him had shifted. I walked over and sat across from him. Hi, I said. Hi, he replied. No tension this time, no raised voices, just distance. We sat in silence for a few seconds, neither of us rushing to fill it. Then he spoke. I read the final report, he said. Everything's been processed. Yeah, I replied. Another pause. Then I didn't think it would get to that point, he admitted. I nodded slightly. I did. He looked at me, searching for something. I thought we had more time, he said. I considered that. Time for what I asked. To figure it out, he said. I let out a small breath. You had 3 years, I said. He didn't argue with that. Instead, he looked down at his hands. I thought you were strong enough, he said. There it was again, that word, strong. I replied. But that doesn't mean I was supposed to do it alone. He nodded slowly. I see that now, he said. I believed him, not because it fixed anything, but because he wasn't trying to reshape the story anymore. He was just sitting in it. I need you to understand something I said. He looked up. This wasn't just about the money, I continued. It was about being left out of decisions that affected my life, about being told to trust something that wasn't transparent. He listened. Really listened. I know, he said quietly, and I'm not here to punish you, I added. I'm here to be clear about what happens next. That got his attention. What do you mean, he asked. I took a breath. I'm not going to pretend this didn't change things, I said, because it did. He nodded once. I don't trust you in the same way I used to, I continued. And that's going to take time if it changes at all. He didn't interrupt. And until then, I said, I need space. Real space. Not just distance, but boundaries. What kind of boundaries, he asked. Financial decisions that involve me are mine, I said. No more for the family without my knowledge. No more assumptions about what I can or can't handle. He nodded again. And communication, I added. If something affects me, I hear it directly. Not later. Not through someone else. That's fair, he said. I studied him for a moment. He meant it, at least right now. I'm not cutting you off, I said, but I'm also not going back to how things were. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied. Another pause. Then he exhaled, leaning back slightly. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, balancing everything, making sure both of you were okay. I understand that, I said. But you didn't just balance. You decided? He nodded. I did. That was the first time he said it that clearly. No qualifiers, no framing, just ownership. And for some reason, that mattered more than anything else he had said so far. We sat there for a while after that, not fixing anything, not resolving everything, just acknowledging it. When I stood up to leave, he did too. Journey, he said. I paused. I'm proud of you, he added. I looked at him. For a second, I didn't know how to respond, because part of me wanted that to mean something, and part of me knew it didn't change what had already happened. Thank you, I said finally, and that was enough. I walked out of the cafe and into the afternoon light. The air felt different, not lighter, just clearer, like something had settled into place. A few months later, life looked steady again. Classes were back on track. The stress that used to sit in the background of everything had quieted. I wasn't constantly calculating what I could afford or what I had to give up. I had space to think about things beyond survival, and that changed more than I expected. Not just what I did, but how I saw myself. I wasn't the version of me that had been waiting for things to make sense. I was the version that had asked questions, looked at the documents, made decisions, and followed through. The trust had done what it was supposed to do, but more importantly, I had. There are people who will tell you that family should come first no matter what, that you should forgive, move on, keep things intact. And sometimes that's true, but not always. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is recognize when something crossed a line and decide what you're willing to accept going forward. For me, it wasn't about cutting ties. It was about changing the terms, understanding that trust isn't automatic just because someone is family, and that setting boundaries isn't the same as revenge. It's just clarity. If you've ever been in a situation where something was kept from you for your own good, I'd really want to hear how you handled it. Did you confront it? Let it go, set boundaries? And if this kind of story resonates with you, you can follow along. There's more coming. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.